So nice to be here with you today. I have a question for you. Are statutes, codes, rules, and regulations laws? I heard that there's some confusion in this area.
Wow, that's such a good question. It's nice to be here with you too. Yeah, great question. Because, as an American, government is not the king. We, the people, are the king. So we have a lot of power in everything. And we got to put ourselves in position to stand on true law, that's land, air, and water, and our God-given rights.
Mhm.
Instead of accepting the rules, regulations of statutes and codes. Statutes and codes, that long settled case law says doesn't even apply to you.
Wow. A lot of us do not know that statutes are not law and who those statutes actually apply to, or how the government is able to hold people accountable to statutes. How do we go and give our power away with these statutes?
I know. It's been a long road. And this is one of the reasons our country was formed the way it was because people said, no, we don't want to give all our power away to rules, regulations, codes, and statutes. So I think another question is, do people know why our lives and our businesses are regulated by government and statutes? Do we know why we are all forced to get these business licenses and practitioner licenses and a bartender license and a license to, or a certificate to have your booth at the farmer's market? Do we know why?
Do we? Law says that government cannot regulate you as long as you are not causing harm to others.
Yeah.
So why do we want to allow government to regulate us if it's not necessary?
I know. I have this conversation a lot, and I'm sure you do too, when you're on the consultation calls and as a senior advisor, is that if you're not causing harm, then why am I so regulated? Well, there's a little bit of truth to it in that we don't want somebody to take a weekend seminar and hang out their shingle as a chiropractor. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is some sense to it, but what has happened is it's gotten so bloated, and please add in if you have anything here to add. But the definition of this licensing is permission to do something that was legal before until a licensing agency or federal government or the state came along and said, oh, well, for whatever reason, whether it was to make some more money, whether it really was to not cause harm to people's life, liberty, and happiness. But then they said, oh, that activity now has to be illegal unless there's a license. And it's not even illegal.
It's so when we operate in the private and we don't have a license, that means that we're going back to how it was before they created the licensure. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. That's why, because law says government cannot regulate you as long as you are not causing harm to other, reiterating that. And this is why we're all about the PMAs.
Yeah. That's where a constitutionally formed PMA is the first step to taking yourself out from under the regulation of government. After all, our founding fathers tell us that government was never meant to rule or regulate the people. And that's where we get into some of these case laws where it shows that statutes are not laws.
Yeah. So real quick, I'm Dr. Lane Linebaugh, and I'm a certified senior advisor with PMA Power.
And I am Amber Wright. I am also a certified senior advisor with PMA Power, and we help to start private member associations for others as they move their practice from the public to the private.
And if you're watching this, maybe it's likely that you already have an unincorporated association or a ministry, or not. You might want to think about that if not. And our intention with this Founding Files series is to preserve history, to preserve the very wise voices of people who came before us, and before it starts to go away, as much as it has been. There's been a lot of forces trying to keep this knowledge from us, but we're uncovering it so fast thanks to those voices. Yeah. So okay, so while we recognize that our God-given rights, liberties, and freedoms, those come from God, okay, those are for first, and we could abolish the Human Rights Declaration and we can abolish the Constitution, we would still have those inherent God-given liberties, rights, and freedoms from God. In America, our Constitution affirms those rights, liberties, and freedoms. So we like that, right?
Yeah, so it's not constitutional rights, they're rights, and the Constitution affirms those rights.
That's right. Yeah. And so we can look at case law and we say, well, in the private, then case law doesn't apply to us, out of that public jurisdiction, or I would even say the bar association jurisdiction. Or the government it's out of that public jurisdiction, yet case law can be very useful in affirming our position. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. This case law that we're going to go over affirms our non-jurisdiction in the public courts.
I love it. Well, let's
right.
look at what you came up with.
Ready to dive in?
I am.
So, as we had asked at the beginning, our statutes, codes, rules, and regulations laws. And as we are bringing these founding cases together, we're operating under unincorporated liberty together. And this is the first of our videos preserving this information.
So look at that. The first thing it says right up on top, statutes are not law.
I'll read first. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 14 of the Constitution clearly says, the government makes the rules for the government, not for the people. Lane, can you read?
Yeah, even that right there is amazing. It makes the rules for the government, not the people. When a change of government takes place from a monarchical to a republican government, the old form is dissolved. Those who lived under it and did not choose to become members of the new had a right to refuse their allegiance to it and retire elsewhere.
By being a part of the society subject to the old government, they had not entered into any engagement to become subject to any new form the majority might think proper to adopt. That the majority shall prevail is rule posterior to the formation of government and results from it. It is not a rule binding upon mankind in their natural state.
There, every man is independent of all laws except those prescribed by nature. He is not bound by any institutions formed by his fellow men without his consent.
Inasmuch as every government is an artificial person, an abstraction, and a creature of the mind only, a government can interfere only with other artificial persons.
So what stands out for you in this?
What stands out here is that when we have a license, we're creating an artificial person to interact with the government.
My goodness. Yeah, amazing. And that government is a creature of the mind.
Mm.
Formed on the mind. And when I read this, I have to break stuff down a lot. And I said, okay, in this case, this man had, he was still in allegiance to the old government. And this case actually upheld that, because they said, even if the majority says, no, we are owing our allegiance to the new government, just because the majority did so didn't mean that he had to, because he was independent of those laws.
Wow.
Amazing.
Very amazing.
Statutes apply only to state created creatures known as corporations.
Constitutionally, a statutory presumption cannot be sustained if there be no rational connection between the fact proved and the ultimate fact presumed.
Statutes apply only to state created creatures known as corporations, no matter whether they are creatures of statute and offices of state, local, or federal government. Amazing.
A statute will not be presumed to have extraterritorial effect outside the territorial jurisdiction of the legislature over persons residing outside the territorial jurisdiction of the legislature.
So what does that one mean? Because that's a little mind bendy for me. To me, it's again that it's the jurisdiction of the legislature, the government, and not, which is the state created of the mind, and it's not having a jurisdiction over the person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that's what it's saying too.
The mind-bending one. A statute is not a law.
Right there, plain and simple. A code or statute is not a law.
A code is not a law.
And furthermore, a concurrent or joint resolution of legislature is not law.
I think that's huge, because we hear about this stuff all the time.
Yeah, we do.
About joint resolutions. Yeah.
And all of these are for government and for entities who contract with the government, such as through licensure.
All codes, rules, and regulations are for government authorities only, not human creators in accord with God's law. Incredible.
Amazing. All codes, rules, and regulations are unconstitutional and lacking due process of law, in that they are void for ambiguity. Sorry, I'm having trouble pronouncing. Ambiguity in their failure to specify the statute's applicability to natural persons, otherwise depriving the same of fair notice, as their construction by definition of term aptly identifies the applicability of such statutes to artificial or fictional corporate entities or persons, creatures of statute, or those by contract employed as agents or representatives, departmental subdivisions, offices, officers, and property of the government, but not the natural person or American citizen immune from such jurisdiction of legalism. To me, that is really clear. What do you think of that one, Lane?
I think this one's super clear. My mind didn't have to go bendy. And
yeah.
Yeah, it's just that all these codes, rules, and regulations are unconstitutional.
Know that we don't have to follow all of the codes and statutes.
Yeah.
Because we're taught that we're supposed to. It's just assumed. It's assumed that we need to get a business license if we want to interact with our neighbor in a business-like way.
Yeah.
We actually don't.
We actually don't. Incredible. So good. So good.
Let's look at the next one. Okay, so here's a quote. from David Edwards. Lane, would you like to read this one?
We help others to lawfully create their own private associations, taking their lives to the private side and separate the natural person from the legal fiction, the corporations. Don't be subject to statutes that you're not meant to be subject to. Learn how to protect yourself, staying in the private domain, and then begin establishing your lawfully established PMA and enjoy the constitutionally guaranteed protections you are meant to have.
We become very thankful for David Edwards for educating us about our right in the private, our right to practice in the private domain, and our right to interact with one another in freedom, complete freedom.
So good. Awesome. Well, that was a great presentation. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah.